Hello and welcome to a new initiative by Moneylife. This is called Moneylife Discussions. How is this going to be different from what you see on the television screens? Well, for one, this is going to be your show, and your concerns and your problems are going to be reflected here. For today's discussion, we have chosen a topic that's quite hot these days, and that is shareholder activism.
Well, let's start with some good news. The most difficult part of shareholder activism is to file a public interest litigation. And there, on August 8th, we've had the Delhi High Court agreeing to implead Midas Touch Investors Association in what was a public interest litigation which questions the very basis of SEBI's consent order mechanism. And I think that is a good blow on behalf of shareholder activism. What do you think?
That's great, but I'm told that SEBI actually wanted to keep Midas Touch out of this, and this is really surprising because Mr. Virendra Jain runs a one-man show in Midas Touch, but has been at the forefront of a lot of very, very solid initiatives like filing a case against CanStar, filing cases about vanishing companies and so on.
Absolutely, and I think it's excellent that the Delhi High Court accepted that and that they have admitted Midas Touch in the case. But the question is, what is Midas really saying which is different from what Deepak Khosla had said when he initially filed the litigation in 2011? What he says is quite simple actually. He says he goes back to the Joint Parliamentary Committee that was set up after the Ketan Parekh scam, and he says that the Joint Parliamentary Committee specifically looked at 6 or 7 companies and asked SEBI to investigate them. And instead of doing an investigation, at least one of them, which he quotes, which is Himachal Futuristic Communication, has been let off with a consent order. So let's see what happens to the others.
Amazing. But that's one kind of activism. I'm told there are lots of other things happening. And one, for instance, is the activism by large institutional investors, like the Children's Retirement Fund.
You know more about that. So why don't you?
That was interesting because Children's Fund, which actually had only 1% shareholding in Coal India, threatened to take the board of directors of Coal India to court, and they alleged that that CIL was being completely run by diktat from the ministry, from the coal ministry, and that was totally to the detriment of shareholders. That was one kind of activism. We haven't seen many more such FII-led activism, of course, but that was one. That was great. Except that in this case, the Children's Retirement Fund probably didn't even know what it was doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a public sector undertaking, and it seems a little naive to think that foreign institutional holders don't understand how public sector undertakings are going to work. It's like, in a bank, if they say that chairman's post is not going to be due to political interference, wouldn't that be rather naive?
Absolutely. The second thing that has been happening is proxy advisory services, and I'm told SEBI has mandated a couple of firms to come up with it. What is happening on that front?
No. SEBI hasn't mandated a couple of firms. What is happening is that SEBI has borrowed the US practice of saying that institutional investors have to vote on every resolution of a company, and they need to study all the resolutions before the AGM and have a view. Now, what happens in the US is there's not enough time because these AGMs are all bunched together, and typically an institutional investor would have 100, 200, 500 companies that he has to look at, where he has to not only look at the resolutions but make a decision. Now, since that doesn't work, they have outsourced it to proxy companies. SEBI, strangely enough, has decided that we need to borrow that practice in India. I mean, you've been on the SEBI Mutual Fund Advisory Committee. Do you think the time is right to even think of something like this?
Absolutely not. That's simply because the mutual funds are not even growing. They are witnessing loss of assets quarter after quarter. They have to have a viable business first of all, and then they have to get into all sorts of activism that we want them to do. There's a third thing happening, which is of course a one-off case as well, and that is activism of the kind by researchers. And there is a case of Veritas, which is Canada-based company, which has come up with 3 reports, one against Reliance, one DLF and one India Books. What's happening on that front?
I know, we can look at Veritas, but if you look at what proxy advisory firms are doing, there are 2 of them in India. One is InGovern and the other is ISS, which is set up by Anil Singhvi, who came from Gujarat. And it's interesting, they have come up with several reports. Okay, they've been making the headlines once in a while. And the first few were IDFC and Wipro and things like that, where they said that don't really only appoint certain directors, don't appoint auditors. I think by and large they've just been ignored. Okay, so
Absolutely.
one thing is very clear, that if proxy advisors come out with reports and they tell companies what to do or how to behave, that's not going to work. So the next thing that they're doing is that they're harping on the fact that SEBI has rules for mutual funds and they want mutual funds to be looking at their advice seriously. Now, it's very interesting, but the Economic Times has reported yesterday where they quoted one of these mutual fund investment managers saying that they're being arm twisted to use these reports.
Really?
I mean, doesn't it mean that mutual funds have just got a business opportunity created? I mean, not mutual funds, the proxy
services.
Yeah, and isn't this a business opportunity created by SEBI? I mean, who asked for it? I don't remember any investor association asking for this kind of advisory service.
Absolutely. Wonder for whom is SEBI working?
And when was it done? It wasn't done under this chairman. So it happened in the last regime, and I think in the last few days of the previous chairman, where the whole bunch of officers who came with him were about to exit, this was just quietly passed and nobody knows about it. So we don't know how proxy advisory businesses are going to grow in India, because there's no demand. I mean, I don't think institutional investors want it, they can do their research. I don't think investors want it, investors are leaving the market by the millions. There are no investors. And the mutual fund industry is in such doldrums that the government is trying to figure out how to keep it alive. They're even talking about bringing back entry loads. So where is the question of making them spend on proxy advice?
Absolutely.
So like you said, we then come to Veritas. And you know, I think you've read all the three reports. What do you think? Reliance, DLF, and now India Bulls.
There's one more, Kingfisher. There are actually four of them. And well, it's most certainly Kingfisher, Reliance Communication and DLF had a lot to hide, and Veritas report was completely actually factual. There's nothing that any of these three things companies could do. But I'm quite intrigued to see that India Bulls has taken a step of actually filing some kind of a complaint. It's a local police complaint. I'm not sure how they're going to sort of implement this, but they are obviously very concerned.
Yeah, I think what India Bulls has done is that they have filed a complaint with SEBI as well as with the police, and I think they've got half a case, as in SEBI has to investigate. If Veritas has got its facts wrong, then there is a case. But when it comes to the police complaint, I'm not so sure, because I think Veritas is an independent research company which has the right to sell its report the way it likes, as long as there's no inside information, and I don't think it is, because Veritas clearly says that it is based on published information and an analysis and interpretation of balance sheet.
As long as there are no factual inaccuracies, that's one thing that one will have to really look out for. So where does this leave us with shareholder activism? What kind of activism that do we really need to see?
I think where it leaves us is very clear, that you need to rebuild investor confidence, which means that you need activism from the regulators. And I think there's no activism happening from the regulators. So forget about shareholder activism. Let's have regulatory activism in India, just as we have judicial activism. That is what is going to regain India's investor confidence.
Well,
thank you.
I think that should be our next cover story. Watch out for it, folks. See you soon.
Thank you.